Good morning, Alan, and hello, everyone else. I'm Terry. Welcome to TARDIS Spider. Today, Asimov and the Robots of Death. But before we get started, I am now over 440 subscribers. I would love to get to 500 subscribers before I start my 5th year. So if you haven't, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. And now, Asimov and the Robots of Death. January 1977. On television, we have one of the big classics, The Robots of Death, widely and not unreasonably cited as one of the better classic Doctor Who stories. It's another story that Doctor Who fans of an older vintage all know well. There is debate on whether this is a shameless ripoff of Isaac Asimov's The Caves of Steel and The Naked Sun. A minor complaint, to be sure, but that it is pointed out itself is strange. The Hinchcliffe era has a tendency to lift things from existing fiction. Think Blood from the Mummy's Tomb, The Quatermass Experiment, or Frankenstein. Many of the stories of this era can be traced directly to their source of influence. Why do we single out the Robots of Death and not other stories to dwell on the source material? Simply, I think that older classic Doctor Who fans are largely sci-fi fans inside, and they know Asimov and are familiar with the robot stories. But let us not assume Doctor Who is closer to Asimov than other sources. In other words, let us not forget Doctor Who is not a normal sci-fi show. Normal science fiction is not how the makers of Doctor Who considered the show in 1977. This is family tea time programming for an audience that would not have heard of Asimov or his robots. So the repackaging of Asimov for a mass family audience is a valid thing to do, keeping one foot in sci-fi and the other in mass appeal entertainment. So even if it is a complete repackaging, in the way The Pyramids of Mars is a repackaging of Hammer Mummy films, there is something to be said for which works of Asimov are to be repackaged. The Asimov stories, The Caves of Steel and The Naked Sun. These two books form a set of tales that follow a human, Elijah Bailey, and a robot, Daniel Oliva. But the book most thought of for robots with Asimov is I, Robot, and there is a profound difference in the two types of stories. I, Robot is a collection of short stories, and all are stories about robots. I, Robot will bring Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. Then he will write short stories that deal with the consequences of these laws. The stories are how the rigid laws of robotics interact with unique situations to produce interesting results. The books about Bailey and Olival, on the other hand, are something more interesting. First, as Doctor Who fans, they are something we are familiar with, a mix of mystery and science fiction. These stories were written by Asimov to prove to John W. Campbell that these genres could be mixed together with success. I, Robot is about a set of rules that the writer has invented. Interesting but limited. The Bailey and Olival books are explorations into the types of society that Olival would encounter. In 1977, the Asimov books that Chris Boucher is lifting from are significant. But all of this said, The Robots of Death does pinch some concept from Asimov. But there is a major difference, in that Boucher is crafting a vintage Agatha Christie murder mystery. A straight-up Christie-style mystery, and the production team is contributing a gorgeous Art Deco-inspired set that echoes the Agatha Christie feel. In terms of the mystery factor, this story owes more to Then There Were None than to the Asimov novels. This is a story about a killer on the loose in a remote, claustrophobic setting with a small group of people, all of whom have a secret. Boucher even takes a shot at Asimov's Bailey and Oliver in Pool and D-84. By the end of the story, the human is suffering from a complete nervous breakdown, and the robot is destroyed. This isn't appropriation, just a careful, considered response to the original text. Similarly, the Doctor taking down a raving mad scientist, making his voice squeaky. Possibly the most beautiful defeat of an enemy to date. The Doctor winning by being clever and by refusing to take his enemy seriously. Now, Leela. Due to the nature of Leela's origin, she is both the product of the Doctor's actions and the product of an older form of civilization. She is savage and primitive. These words capture the basic truth. Leela's civilization is at a much earlier level of development than that of any companion. But her culture is also one that extends directly from the Doctor's actions. She is not primitive, she is the product of a primitive civilization. She is as futuristic as she is primitive. And for her character to work, she must be able to outdo the Doctor at times, having a different insight than his. Boucher does this with brilliance. Leela senses what's going on with Poole ahead of everyone else, only to be unable to frame her insight into terms the others will understand. In the end, Leela has spent the entire story ahead of the game. Now, this brings us to the strange explanation on how the TARDIS works, explaining how the interior of the TARDIS can be larger than the exterior. But the explanation the Doctor gives is ridiculous, and Leela calls the Doctor out, accusing him of being silly. She, and we know, the Doctor has been obviously using BS. But more than anything, the Robots of Death is a strong example of the Hinchcliffe approach to storytelling. The Robots of Death is not only my first Doctor Who experience, but one of my all-time favorites. I hope that you've enjoyed this video, and please never ever forget, a child cannot have a favorite book if they do not have one. Give a child a book today.